Oh, check fees.
It's a bribe.
It's a bribe, Ellen.
Yeah, right.
This is the February Foundation. It's been sitting in the mailbox for the last 5 years. So if you don't mind, giving it priority.
Okay.
And they have a form in there, but I think I'm a resolution. I already sent it to them.
But we'll send you for another.
Right, and I already sent them back.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very pleased that it's been very good with this.
We already have received some funds.
Right.
Or if you remember it, yeah, that's good. This meeting to order, please rise for the pledge of allegiance.
With allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for coming to this special meeting of the Cooperstown Board of Trustees. We do have an agenda, and the special use permit for 10 Chestnut is on the agenda, but moved down. It will be the first order of business. We will be handling that first tonight. I do want to just give a little bit of a recap. At the prior 2 meetings, I've sort of held up the timeline of the way things would progress. You know, if a special use permit is approved, so you would have that information. This timeline has been posted on the village website and is also available at the village office. In reviewing it, you would note that April 26th is when we first had the initial presentation on this 10 Chestnut project. We declared that we would be the lead agency. We asked our boards to give us input for that. And at our May 24th meeting, we completed seeker and we all approved at that May 24th meeting this timeline. And at that point, we set the public hearing. So the public hearing for this special use permit was held on June 28th. And many of you may have come to that. It was, people spoke for a little over 2 hours that evening. We also received on June 28th our report back from the Otsego County Planning Department, which we had forwarded at the end of April. So I want you to know that the board has received the planning board, the county planning board review. We have received letters. I estimate, I know personally, I have like 60 letters and emails in my packet. All the letters and emails are, of course, official record and are at the village. We also have received phone calls and conversations. So I think this board has put in a lot of time considering this project. And we're now at the point where permit. And just to recap again, this 10 Chestnut is in the R3 residential core district, which allows family dwellings of 4 or more units as a special permitted use. So that's why we are looking at a special use permit. Let's see, at our public hearing on June 28th, I had notes from about 36 people speaking, and I made notes of all of them. I think many of us on the board did. So we feel that we've given a great deal of time to listen to people's comments and to read your mail, your emails and letters, and to allow you to speak. But I don't have to open a public comment now, but if there's anyone who feels they have not had the opportunity to say anything, I will let you speak now. Okay, then we are going to begin reviewing the special use permit process. What is entailed is that when considering an application for a special use permit, the Village Board of Trustees, as applicable to our areas of jurisdiction, will review essentially 16 criteria. And we will begin with number 1. We'll read what that criteria is, and then board members will be allowed to comment whether they feel that we're addressing that or how we're addressing that. So, number 1, need. The proposed use, with the exception of home occupations, accessory dwelling units, and short-term rentals, must meet adopted municipal plan or land use policy. And I know I made notes on my copy. Does anyone want to start? I can begin with some of the notes I wrote down. Need and adopted plans. In 2007, the Notre Dame study documented the need for this type of housing, apartment style housing and additional housing. The 2016 Village of Cooperstown Comprehensive Plan also had a major section on housing and documenting the need. The 2017 Bassett Housing Survey also documented need and included, the number of employees who indicated they would reside in the village and what types of rents they would pay, etc. Certainly, our village land use policy supports the need. And even at the public hearing on June 28th, even though many people did speak sort of against the project, they began by saying, yes, our community needs housing. So I don't think that there's really much discussion. I think that is a given, the need.
I agree.
Okay. Number 2, adjacent land uses. The proposed use must not be detrimental to its site or to adjacent parcels. The proposed must be of such location, size, and character that it will be in harmony with its surroundings and with the appropriate and orderly development of the area in which it is proposed to be situated. Anybody with comments or notes?
I will say, as I was going back and reading the letters, it's very interesting that people characterize this neighborhood in terms of land use very differently. And I think that depends on how you define the area and whether you're talking about adjoining properties, which are largely single family homes, or whether you sort of step out a little bit further and start to consider the inns, the apartment building that's at 162 Main, the opera ticket office, the land realty building. I mean, this really is a sort of multi-type of use area. And in that sense, I feel like this use is harmonious with the variety of other uses that are found there.
I agree entirely with that. I find this use more harmonious with what's around it than what's currently there.
I would concur with that. All right. So we made a decision on that one. Number 3, location and size of use. The nature, volume, and times of operation of the use involved, the size and layout of the site in relation to the use, and the location of the site with respect to existing and future streets providing access must be in harmony with the orderly development of the area in which it is proposed to be situated.
I have 2 comments on this particular criterion that may relate to conditions that we want to put on the special permit. The first has to do with long-term rental. So we've been assured by the applicants that these units will be used for long-term rental, but I think based on this criterion, this forces us to really make that a stipulation that these will be long-term and that there will be subleases, because that would create a very different type of environment. The other has to do with the street. And I do think that we should require of the applicant to address the improvements that are needed to Fenimore Lane in order to make the project possible. We all know that it needs to be paved, it needs grading.
Is this also addressing sort of the stormwater management? Were you putting that
Well,
further on?
I put that one under the drainage, which is number 10, but this does actually, ask us to consider existing and future streets, and Fenimore as an existing street needs to be improved to provide adequate access.
I'd like to just go add one other thing to your first point. I would like stipulation in releases that they cannot rent for Hall of Fame induction weekend. We brought that up as a stipulation previously, when somebody asked for a special permit.
So I was jotting here, long-term housing, no subleases, and no short-term rentals, and no renting for a Hall of
Which
Fame.
we seem to take as a separate category.
Okay, when I jotted long-term housing, are we stipulating what that is? Because at one point it was 30 days or more was considered long-term. Are we doing anything specific to that?
Well, I mean, our zoning law says 30 days. I think it makes sense to focus on a year as a rental term. I mean, clearly we can't be responsible for people who break their lease.
What about 9 months? No, you don't, okay.
Well, I don't mind a 9 month. I think 30 days
It's too short.
is too short.
We both agree with that.
So,
I'll go along with you.
so long-term housing, with a minimum term of 1 year is basically sort of.
If Rich wants 9 months, that's
I
fine.
don't like 9 months.
All right,
You don't like 9 months?
all right. we'll make it-
1 year is.
I withdraw.
The developers already said that that's their intention as well,
Yeah.
so.
Right, but we
wanna
can
put it
put
in.
parameters.
Clear as
in
our
this.
intention.
Okay, all right, so we've got that. And you are doing Fenimore Lane as separate from the stormwater, but we could couple that kind of all together later, but improvements. Is there anything else on that? No, so does everyone feel that with those stipulations, which we'll attach to the special use permit, we're addressing number 3, okay? Location, nature, and size of buildings and structures, this is number 4. The location, height, footprint, and volume of buildings, and the location, nature, and height of walls, fences, and landscape features must be such that they will not hinder or discourage the development and use of adjacent parcels and buildings.
It's essentially the same footprint as what's there, only it'll
Low, small.
better setbacks. So
I think visually, from Chestnut Street, the architect has done a good job of constructing what looks like a sort of 19th century facade house. Was there other thoughts?
I don't know in your current plans whether there's what is shown as screening between this building and the adjacent properties that are fenced or anything that's being shown.
There is.
There's a 6-foot privacy fence that runs the entire north side, and I believe we're gonna be connecting just a single section.
Because I think that is important to protect the value of the adjacent properties.
Is everyone comfortable with that? Number 5, density of development. The density of the surrounding area, such as lot size, distances between structures, amount of open space, street width, and parking regulations must maintain the character of the zoning district in which it is proposed to be situated. And I think probably this deserves a little discussion, because there's obviously density of the actual structure on the property, but that one element of density was also highlighted at the public hearing.
Could you repeat those exact words again?
Read that one again, density of development. The density of the surrounding area, such as lot size, distances between structures, amount of open space, street width, and parking regulations must maintain the character of the zoning district in which it is proposed to be situated.
So it meets the zoning requirement in terms of lot coverage, which is how we're now measuring density. I was sort of interested because when we were making revisions to the zoning law, we looked specifically at Elm Street, which we knew had a lot of apartments and which seemed to work in terms of the relationship between buildings and open space. So I got to wondering, is there anything in the vicinity of this property that has a similar 60% coverage? And the building that does is Veronica Seaver's house. It actually is in the vicinity of this project and is at about 60%. So I think, I think it does work in this area, and it certainly meets the zoning requirement.
I agree with Dr. Falk's earlier comment. This neighborhood is really a mixed-use neighborhood. And this is very consistent with the fact this is less of a step towards what's there right now, i.e. commercial establishments. Then itself, this is a residential project.
And I think relative to distances between structures in that one, the prior building was actually, I should say prior, the existing commercial building, which potentially would be demolished, is larger, and it actually touched abutted property lines along the way, whereas this proposal, dimension-wise, is well within the setbacks. So it that density component of the property coverage is undeniable. Any more comments or thoughts on density of development? I should alert you, you have a packet in front of you, and we are handling the special use permit first, but I glanced through it and I realized there are 2 letters pertinent to this project, in case you wanted to glance over them. Interestingly, one of them does discuss density and notes that they live near 3 adjacent apartment houses containing 15 units, and that they really don't see the traffic issues. They cite Cooper Lane and not seeing traffic issues, so they're not seeing the 13 units as sort of a density issue here. But that's one of the.
I just want to make sure there's actually 4. There's 2 in the packet and 2 that came this afternoon after the packets were made. So there's a total of 4.
And they are, and the other 2 are, so maybe did they get around?
Yep, they should be in. They were underneath the opening section. So they should be.
Apologize.
It's hard to make sure.
All right. All right, so that is number 5. Number 6, vehicular access and circulation. Provisions for vehicle traffic access and circulation, including intersections, road widths, alignment, grade, pavement surfaces, stormwater infrastructure, visibility, and I lost my last line. And visibility and traffic controls must promote safety considering the proposed use. Access ways must be adequate for safety, but not excessive.
So I think Fenimore Lane, which we talked about under number 3, could also fit here. I think too, the planning board made a recommendation that where the driveway comes out on Pine, we may need to establish some no parking areas, and I believe if all the permits are issued, we should consider doing that through a public hearing process. I think we need to do the same thing for Fenimore Lane, so I think it's fairly obvious that one should not park in Fenimore Lane, given its width, but that's not a law that's on the books. It did used to be marked, as I think Mr. Kingsley brought up, as a fire lane, and it may have been marked that way, but it's not recorded in our code that way, so I think when it comes to vehicular access, those are 2 things the village may need to address in the future.
Were you looking to set a public hearing tonight for the no parking zone?
I think we should probably wait until the planning board does its site plan review to determine if there are any additional considerations that they want to make. I mean, I will point out the planning board is primarily charged with reviewing vehicular access, and in their report to us, they felt that the project did make adequate provisions for safe vehicular traffic flow.
Is there any other comments? One of the letters that had concerns is that wanted that us to ensure that Pine Boulevard egress lane, or whatever it'll be called, access lane, the private drive, is very much part of this project. There would be no reason for it not to be, or do we have to do something to ensure that?
I think because it's included on the site plan, it would be.
100%. So there's no one should have a concern that somehow it wouldn't be addressed after a special uses permit is granted. Okay.
And in the end, the planning board's gonna make those determinations.
Right.
If you give the special permit, they will have to make those decisions.
On the road,
Yeah.
on the private drive. Okay, I just wanted to.
It might be worth commenting. I know several of the neighbors commented from the further side of Pine Boulevard about their fear of people turning around back towards Main Street. That might be something that we want to discuss in the future. Maybe it's like a no turn. I don't know if that's possible, but something
It's
to
a
think
turning
about.
lane, it's a turning lane, isn't it?
Is there a cut through there?
There's
Just down,
Yes,
there's
it
a
goes
other
down further.
down.
No prohibition on that.
No prohibition on this front.
At this time, right?
Or maybe it's something that if it becomes an issue in the future.
Well, I would think that these are things that would have to come back to the village in terms of traffic. Further, traffic further down the street is a different issue than the approval, especially this program.
Often.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I will say one thing that I thought about in terms of this, and it's been discussed, is whether someone may use this as a cut through to avoid the traffic light. I'm not sure that you gain much.
How do you
but-
gain it? You still need a traffic light.
Well, in any case, I mean, one thing that was discussed was a gate. I am not generally in favor of gated developments in anywhere. But I think the developer should be aware that that's something, if we all find that people run through that,
I
that
can't
in the
believe-
future might
people there.
Yeah, I'm really seeing people zooming
Yeah.
close up.
Is there any more comment or consideration on number 6? Okay, we'll move on to number 7. Pedestrian circulation, provisions for pedestrian traffic access and circulation, walkway structures, control of intersections with vehicular traffic, and overall pedestrian convenience must promote safety and accessibility.
So I have one concern. The pedestrian access is mostly from the front porch out to the public sidewalk. The accessible entry and exit are at the back of the building. If you run a wheelchair, for instance. There's not a great walkway right now in the plan. Something that needs to be looked at.
Well, there are two, it's not just the back, it's the side. Well, it's right, if I made it, these are the handicap accessible parking spaces.
Okay.
And then you know how there's usually the wide area, so this is a straight shot in here on ground level. So then there's a ramp here, a wheelchair ramp here. So there are two. You are correct, the front does not have a ramp. So you would, if you were, in a motorized wheelchair or wheelchair, you would come out here, you have this, and then you would, walk down the lane to the sidewalk, to that sidewalk, or up to this one, depending on where you were going. Same thing out the back here. This goes right to the handicapped accessible spots.
So I guess my concern is driving a wheelchair in the lane is not a great idea.
Right. That has been something we've had a hard time solving, being as the lane is only so wide, and we don't on either side, and so we are open to ideas if there are
Suggestions.
suggestions. We haven't come up with a real great option for like say someone had more residential chair. We don't have a real good option for that in terms of short of.
I mean, I don't know how they get out of the inn if they're in a wheelchair. They don't have a ramp at the front. They don't have wheelchair access. And they're using the same lane, so,
But these are ADA compliant apartments, which is fantastic.
right,
And so there might potentially be someone in the wheelchair driving where the inn is not accessible. So sadly, nobody in a wheelchair would be able to stay there.
I agree, and I have many patrons who like to come to the office who are in wheelchairs and are upset they can't stay in some of the nicer places here, historic places, because they haven't come up to ADA codes. So I'm totally with you, but I am thinking like, is there something, and I think we'd have to think, because I don't know if actually coming out from the front is the best thing if you're in a motorized wheelchair either, because there's so much more room on the side entrance, you're like, is it if we put a sidewalk along the building, or, along the fence there, but then you run into a tree, so I think it's a valid question, and it might be something more about, is the town willing to engage in, should there be a sidewalk on this lane? Is that something that we would work on together? Because again, like I said, we're next to a historic building which doesn't have it, and so I'd be more than happy if there was a sidewalk there. I think, I'm all for sidewalks. I'm a big believer. I'm like really upset Springfield Center has no sidewalks. That's not our problem here, but I'm like, sidewalks are good, so I'm with you. But maybe it's better from the back and down the lane if there was a sidewalk.
And the problem with skirting around the edge of the building is the big tree, correct?
There are a couple trees there. In the early plans, the idea was we didn't want to put a ton of pedestrians walking right by like the neighboring houses backyard.
Yeah.
Which was again the reason why like on the north side, why there's no entrances and stuff. It's just to keep sort of the general flow of people and everything, either up the lane, which is kind of tied into the parking lot, which is sort of like an area where there's sort of circulation anyways, or out the front of the building.
But if you went out the back, of course, it's 2 cars wide, so you're, you know, if you go out the back ramp on the second floor, which there's no, it's the second floor, but it's,
Right.
but because of the grade,
Right.
you go right in, so you go out and then you're on a 2-lane public alley and a 2-lane public alley here as well.
We would be open to putting a sidewalk.
Here, and
Here.
then you would be immediately at the Pine Boulevard
And
side.
I believe there's
That's
not
that's
sidewalk this direction.
No, but there's one there.
Right.
I think it goes to the, I looked at it.
Right.
So I mean, that's an option. We're open to it. We just kind of.
But I think that's a good idea, that's much wider, and then you're on Pine Boulevard. Which is a very nice street too. And you would be, you know, come down right to there and you're on Main Street, so. I think it's a good question, and I think one that we could certainly explore, and
Would that be like a requirement we'd put in here that we would ask the planning board to really address the, you know, the ADA compliant sort of access to the sidewalk? Yeah.
I think you're talking about primarily someone who would be in a motorized wheelchair, because if you were in a wheelchair, a manual wheelchair, somebody would be pushing it, so therefore you would have somebody with you, so you wouldn't be on your own. Problem.
Not great to be in a lane.
No, okay, so I'm just saying, I'm thinking, you know, I hear you, and I'm like thinking we should absolutely look at that and find the right solution.
So we stipulate that in
For the
the potential.
For the planning board to,
Yeah, that the planning board needs to, you know, address that issue and see what possible solutions would be.
Elevation. Is it impossible to somehow put a ramp on the street facing side of the building?
I think if we were granted some variances on width. Because I think to put it in the front of the building, I think we would wrap more than halfway across the front. And so we need access on the side to incorporate additional ramp space. And at which point we would be able to. So,
But that's a possibility also.
so.
but I do think the side entrance is really big on the main floor.
Yeah.
And there is, you know, setback behind all the cars going up. So it's actually not the whole lane, it's half a lane. See what I mean here? Come out. Okay, this is all our space. So the lane is wide.
Okay.
So it's only,
But
This
is
one.
ADA, I mean, there's no way to
You know what I'm saying?
access from this, see what I'm saying?
that's not our.
Well,
yeah.
That might be a possibility.
We'd be open to the sidewalk there, or yeah, we just need some variances in case that happens. So there's.
But I
So
said,
that's a hallway.
I think going up the back, there's already a lot of space in front. Yeah, out the side here. It also depends if the person is parking their car there, their van, let's say, they're coming out their van, then they got a lot of room to get in.
Well, it seems like, you know, we want this considered by the planning board, we'll let them kind of work out the machinations with the, you know, we'll make that a stipulation. All right, is there anything else on number 7, pedestrian circulation?
I just wanted to confirm, as you said, that the intention is to keep the sidewalk on high. That was something that came up in the public hearing. At this point, the village doesn't have an intention of extending it, but there may be a time when we want to, so it's important that it, you know,
We don't have any plans to take out.
We're pro sidewalk, pro sidewalks.
that is a dead end sidewalk, but.
Okay, well, then that would be over in the village.
If there's no more comment on number 7, we'll move on to number 8. Parking, location, arrangement, appearance, and sufficiency of off-street parking spaces and loading berths must be adequate for the proposed use and in harmony with adjacent parcels. The general landscaping of the site must be compatible with plant species generally found in the area and serve to mitigate the visual impact of the parking area.
So on a very basic level, I think it's important that we stipulate there needs to be a lot line adjustment so that all of the parking is on the same parcel as the project.
We want to use the third parcel on Pine.
They are.
They are, so they need to do a lot line adjustment.
Okay,
to
great.
indicate that.
Okay, great.
Otherwise.
Just to bring it all in.
Okay, great, okay.
I mean, I think that this is again something that both the planning board as well as the zoning board of appeals need to address in their reviews. They've already given it a tremendous amount of thought, both boards have made some suggestions that have been incorporated in the plan. And I really think that that's where the board, the details of the parking review need to fall.
I think, you know, for us, certainly the parking's all not visible from the sidewalk, street sort of thing. It's sort of in the rear, and the plans definitely show a lot of plantings and stone walls for screening. You know, one complaint that was brought up, and I kept thinking about it, is backing onto a village street. And I was thinking, well, on Beaver Street, I don't think there's a single property where anybody can turn around. We all back onto Beaver Street, which is a heck of a lot busier than Benmore Lane is. But is that a concern that
No,
they're gonna have to think about?
no, just for that reason alone.
Well, I mean, I think it is important that Mr. Kingsley brought up the fact that people should not be backing onto his property, and that's a legitimate concern, and that's why I think, you know, I know from rereading the minutes today that the zoning board of appeals, they give it a tremendous amount of thought to what the turning radius is and that sort of thing, and I feel like that will be scrutinized in the next 2 review meetings that you have to attend, and a determination will be made as good as possible.
Okay. I did receive one phone call, was from a resident at Cooper Lane. And they said, you know, there they provide visitor parking. Do, you know, is there any considerations here?
Is there precedent that we require visitor parking?
No.
Require one spot per bedroom.
I mean, I think the difference is at Cooper Lane, there's no parking on Glen. And there's
There's no parking.
generally no parking on that side of Chestnut except under very specific funeral situations. So in this case, there is parking on Chestnut across the street, and there is parking on both sides of Pine. Now, we know that that's premium parking, but I think if people have visitors, there are public parking spaces in the vicinity that they can use.
That was my thought too, that they park on Chestnut or Pine, so, all right. So we have completed the parking, number 8. Number 9, layout. The location, arrangement, size, design, and general site compatibility of buildings, lighting, and signage must be in general harmony with the character and appearance of the surrounding neighborhood.
I have a question for the applicants, and that is about signage. So the planning board, I think, asked about signage. There's nothing that had been proposed yet. I mean, it seems to me if we want this to blend with the neighborhood, probably no to minimal signage is.
I think that would be, we haven't really talked signage at all, but I don't know that it needs like a storefront sign. You know, people aren't coming to town looking for, they only gotta do that once, then they know where they live.
Yeah, and then the same thing for lighting. Clearly, there needs to be safety lighting, but it should be residential.
Planning board's gonna handle lighting and ZBA will be handling the harmony issues.
Then if we're moving on from number 9, 10, drainage. Drainage facilities / erosion control. Stormwater management plans and drainage facilities must be in conformance with applicable regulations and must protect natural resources and adjacent parcels. And I think this is where you wanted to address the stormwater management.
It is, so I don't know, those of you who live on Pine, I'm sure you're aware of this. There is not adequate stormwater on Pine, and the stormwater that exists sort of dumps into this property and then runs into a number of backyards and often causes flooding. So the fact that the applicant has indicated a willingness to address the stormwater issue by running a line that would connect Pine with Chestnut and pick up the stormwater on Fenimore Lane is in my mind huge. And I think that that's the way that number 10 gets addressed. It's something that the streets committee has been talking about a need for years.
In this case, the project is a big plus for that.
So it's gonna be a
It needs to be
condition.
a condition.
Yeah, it's a condition, okay. All right, anything else on number 10? Moving on, landscape. The nature and extent of landscaping on the site must meet or exceed all legal requirements for screening and must not hinder or discourage the development and use of adjacent parcels and buildings. Existing must be retained to the extent possible.
So I have 2 comments. One is that I think everyone's in agreement about keeping as many existing trees as is possible, including through the demolition process. When it comes to screening, I think this is an issue the zoning board of appeals is going to address, because this project does not meet the letter of the law when it comes to legal requirements for screening of parking. It would be almost impossible, in my opinion, to do that, given the fact that it's completely surrounded by public roads, but the zoning board of appeals is gonna have to make a call on whether they find the screening acceptable or not.
And we all know that the tree committee did meet and walk the site and has already addressed some neighbors' issues with trees, et cetera. And so those were all previously discussed.
There are some beautiful mature trees that are bordering this property.
All right, moving on. 12, water and sewer, adequacy of water supply and sewage disposal facilities and their compliance with New York State and Otsego County Departments of Health requirements are required. Well, I think this one, considering we're just completing a $9 million wastewater treatment plant upgrade, we can be assured that we have state-of-the-art and great capacity at our wastewater treatment plant. Thirteen, emergency access. Adequate provision for fire, police, and other types of emergency vehicles must be made.
I did speak with the fire chief today, who had a list of concerns that he expressed at the public hearing. His biggest concern, because I think the issues regarding solar and the like can all be addressed, is about access with the aerial ladder. And this really has little to do with this project. There are power lines on Chestnut Street. There are power lines on Pine. Pine is narrow. Chestnut with parking is narrow. Fenimore Lane is narrow. Is it impossible to get a fire truck back there? No. Is it easy? Also no. So it's just something, it's a situation that currently exists. It affects the inn at Cooperstown, it affects the current building, it affects everybody who lives in that area. And this project doesn't change it. Doesn't make it better, but it doesn't fundamentally make it worse either.
So there should be some power lines on.
Both sides.
Yeah. That and the narrowness of the street, right?
They could get under the power line to get in there and raise the bucket.
Yes.
But for example, you have the same problem if you had a fire in the hotel next door, Hotel 2000 there.
Everyone feel that's addressed?
Mhm.
14, lighting. New buildings and structures must be designed, constructed, and maintained, and new and existing vegetation must be managed so as not to unreasonably impede solar radiation on other properties in order to preserve the economic value of solar radiation on buildings, structures, and parcels. Investments in solar energy systems and options for future uses of solar energy. Artificial outdoor lighting must be kept to the minimum intensity needed for the proposed use, fully shielded to minimize glare and prevent light trespass and sky glow, and confined within the boundaries of the property. It's really is falling under, planning board will ultimately be addressing a lot of this. I don't know if there's some additional comments or thoughts.
When it comes to solar energy, this is tangentially related. There was a lot of discussion at the planning board about EV chargers. And a former trustee said to me, it would be good if you design your project so that if we get to a time when everyone has an electric vehicle, that electricity can be generated through solar power, and it could help reduce the carbon footprint.
I will also note that on the application, it was noted that the proposed building is approximately 20 feet narrower than the current building, allowing for larger property setbacks and better solar radiation on neighboring properties. Anything else? Someone feel that's okay. Number 15, noise, odor, and other irritants. Adequate nuisance prevention measures have been or will be taken to prevent or control offensive odors, fumes, dust, noise, and vibration that would hinder or discourage the development or use of adjacent parcels and buildings.
I think it's important in terms of trash collection to work with the neighbors to ensure that that's not happening at an hour where it is incredibly disturbing. And I also think while the heat pumps are rated extremely quiet, that after the fact, being aware that if they are given their number of causing noise that's disruptive, there may need to be additional sound screening. I think it's possible to tell that at this point, but.
And I know Joe had this comment on that. Heat pumps are rated at 47 decibels within the village's noise criteria.
Yeah.
More.
Well, not that it would be more from individual units, but it could potentially be disruptive.
Mhm.
Could.
47 is awfully low.
I agree with that.
I mean,
To those of us who, when we were doing our noise law, had all downloaded decibel apps on our phone, we suddenly realized how loud people were yelling at us.
you just spoke at about 75, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's
And
something.
that's 45 to 75 is 1,000 times louder, so, yeah, 45 is pretty low. Like dishwashers, 55, you
Ready,
can't. I
Mark?
can't.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I think they, in the plans, adjust this with, the limited outdoor space, other than a front porch and a little bit of green space in the front, there are balconies. Or any real gathering places that would, so I think that addresses it, yeah, probably.
Moving on to 16, fiscal considerations. The proposed use will not require such additional public facilities or devices as to create a net fiscal burden upon the village greater than those which characterize uses permitted by right.
And this again, I think is why a condition about the road and the stormwater are important.
And sort of contrasting that would be certainly an increased tax base on this property. All right, any other fiscal considerations? All right. I've jotted some stipulations, I'm sure you have too, Cindy. Is there anything any of the board would like to say further on this project? Is there a motion?
To approve with stipulations as noted during this meeting.
Maybe we should highlight them to make sure Jenna gets them in the record. Let's see. One of our stipulations, and Cindy, chime in if you have better wording here, is that it be for long-term housing with a minimum term of 1 year, no subleasing and no short-term housing rentals, including for Hall of Fame weekend. Do you want to wrap Fenimore in one, the improvements to Fenimore, including paving plus the addressing the stormwater management along the proposed driveway from Pine Boulevard through Fenimore Lane?
Yep.
That's 2. We want to make sure that the planning board gives due consideration to an ADA compliant sidewalk if possible, potentially to Pine Boulevard. Okay. We ask that there be a lot line adjustment, so all the parking is on one parcel. And surety. Do we ask for any funds or a bank letter of credit?
Seems like a performance bond, is what you're doing, so you don't have a project partially done. Some of the suggestions in the law are cash deposits, performance bond, or a letter of credit to ensure completion of the project, if that's a concern.
Is that one of the stipulations you would like on this special use?
I didn't bring that one, somebody else.
No,
It was in the materials you reviewed.
Yeah, well, I think that one of those has to be met.
I think that a letter of credit would suffice.
Okay,
I mean, I think that the applicants could provide whatever form of surety that.
Yeah, that's what I-
surety
How's
for
that?
the value
That's
of the project
whatever's easiest.
best suits their
Okay.
finances.
Get that, Jenna? Get that one. All right.
There
So,
are 3 others that I made note
Oh.
of, maybe you don't consider them, but just the leaving trees. Maybe that's already been discussed and agreed upon. Signage, we never, I don't know if you wanted a condition on that. And you had some talk about parking, no parking on either side of the driveway coming out on the Pine Boulevard.
That's up to us, isn't it? But the width of the driveway coming out to Pine Boulevard is up to them.
Correct.
With planning board review.
With planning board review, but I mean, the planning board review, the width of the driveway would be the width of the property ultimately. Planning board review with planning board review signage. I don't think we need to go into that, if the planning board can handle that.
I just was making notes.
so we all good with ours, the one stipulations that we currently stated? Okay, so the motion has been made. The criteria that we wanted considered for granting the special use permit have been itemized and listed. There was a second motion. Jean, second by Jean. All those in favor of granting a special use permit with the criteria stipulated, please raise your hand. No no's? All right, so for everyone's knowledge, that timeline, which again I said has been posted on the village website, would then give you the next step in this process, which would be tomorrow, HPARB meets at 5 o'clock. If the special permit has been issued, there will be a possible decision on certificate of appropriateness. I believe they also were pending their demolition, were they not?
They conditioned it on the special permit.
Yeah, they conditioned it, okay. So that will be the next meeting, and all of these subsequent meetings are listed on the timeline. The concerns that have been raised can still be addressed at some of those public meetings. Thank you. I know it'll take a few minutes for people to depart, and we have to continue a meeting, so I'll give about a 5-minute recess here, so people can get it off. Thank you.
You look different every time.
All good. Always changing. Always.
For the
How did you know?
guys have to serve us.
Do you know Phoebe, Smith?
We've met her for a few minutes.
Okay. Yeah, she's gonna talk to you guys about the story.
Yes, she is, so she's speaking to a couple individually.
Yeah, I think so.
How do you want this?
If you guys, this way. I'm gonna get in front of the building and flags.
The women's congress.
Yeah.
All of us.
Yeah.
Oh, we all move over.
Yeah. Sorry.
Chairs are pretty happy.
Yeah, that's.
It'll be from here out anyway.
We're gonna get there.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you. Thank you.
Is there anything?
Do things. Yes, let's do that. No. Oh, we barely tried.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Trustees, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys. Cheers.
I didn't realize you were back there, Jackson. I don't know if everyone has had a chance to meet our new CEO. How tall he was, yes. He actually, Jackson, indicated that our very, very, very long, hot meeting on June 28th, he watched to the bitter end when he got appointed or hired approval. So I commended him for that because we all had about 1 foot out the door at that moment. So welcome.
But I was watching from the comfort of my own home, so.
Hopefully you're cooler than we were.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully the insects weren't flying in our mouths. All right, so we will now proceed with the rest of the items on our agenda, including lifeguard appointments. And Jean, as Parks
Yes.
Chair, would you like to make the motion on those two?
I move that we hire a caterer, really good. As lifeguards, seasonal lifeguards.
Motion made by Jean, second by Richard, all in favor?
The assigned wage is not a living wage, and I believe it should be a policy of Cooperstown to pay all of its employees a village wage. So I will be voting no.
No, okay. And I know when you mentioned this before, you sit on Parks Board, so please work with your chair of Parks Committee, Jean, and maybe you'll revise the schedule for this year, for next year, I mean.
I'll pass a note along to you.
You can start drafting it. The Art Association has an application to use village property for opening receptions, and I think some of us may have attended last Friday night, so we've already attended one of these receptions. Is there a motion? Cindy?
I'll make a motion to allow the art association to hold their opening receptions on the porch and lawn, weather permitting, on July 9th, August 20th, October 1st, and November 12th.
Motion
I'd like to make a stipulation here. They do not have either enough wine or beer.
1 to 2 cases and 2 cases of beer, not enough for 100
So
people.
no way.
All right, so
Second.
motion made, seconded by Matt, all in favor?
Aye.
So Cindy, you asked this to be on the agenda, the public hearing for the no parking, but we will wait on that, maybe?
I believe we should wait on it until after this is done for further review process.
Okay. And then we need to have a discussion on Hall of Fame vending. You know, between our meetings, it's sort of changed a few times. We now know it is September 8th. And we have authorized the closing of Main Street between Chestnut and Fair for September 7th and September 8th. But we have not made a decision on vending. There a recommendation or thoughts?
I think we should definitely allow outdoor vending on the sidewalks for sure.
We are allowing it for our special event. We did it for the whole summer.
Right, so I assume that those permits include,
Yeah, so for our local merchants, they are allowed to vend in front of their brick and mortar
Or
business.
these not.
These, no,
2 of them are, one, the Perry Farrar dropped off too, I believe he's local, yeah.
yeah,
So it's like, we're not down each of them then.
This Huntington Baseball Company is a partnership, I believe, with the Cooperstown Distillery.
Which one?
Beverage Exchange, the Huntington Baseball Company. The Huntington Baseball Company's merchandise is sold at the Cooperstown Beverage Exchange.
It's gonna be done at the beverage exchange.
Yeah, there's a letter.
With the
attached.
agreement with the
Yeah.
beverage exchange.
Yes.
I mean, I wonder just whether we should allow vending for the induction day and maybe Tuesday as well, so Tuesday and Wednesday on the sidewalks, as we already permit, in Pioneer Park and on the lawn of 22 Main.
Yeah.
And, you know, because of Music on Main, I wonder, because the street will be closed, whether it's worthwhile to consider moving Music on Main to somewhere in the street. To continue to allow that opportunity and to allow things even more.
We do have electrical outlets on the street from the lampposts. Is that where they would, because we did, you know, when we revised, when we renovated Pioneer Park, we made sure we had electrical outlets behind that little stage.
Yes.
So we think,
Is there a reason you can't do music up on the stage and vending?
I think the vending would sort of prohibit seeing
Okay, to it.
people playing.
the other thing is to put the music How many, so at the moment, sort of out of town, because obviously Huntington is in front of a business, because it's with the beverage exchange. So our ones for out of town are, is that such Kittis?
Yep.
And
And people.
Peebles.
Well, so here's another idea, would people be receptive? Because the transportation hub is at the corner of Main and Fair, to having music run with electricity off of 22 Main.
That's what I was about to
On
suggest.
the lawn while people are standing around waiting to get on the trolley or get on their shuttle bus.
That's what I was gonna suggest, that it be there, because I think if we put vendors down there, they're gonna feel we shunted them
Yeah.
beyond the closed area.
But music was in travel.
Travel, yeah, yeah. So that was, and it's Sutkitis, whatever you pronounce his name, he's asking for Friday through Sunday, so I'm a little confused by that.
He did this June 9.
Oh,
This has been here a while,
okay.
so it was before the decision to make it. the
Before.
8th. He was hoping to do it July 20.
Okay, oh, this is the,
Yes, the lovely.
yeah, I've had a couple emails from him, that's
So what's
right.
this,
Excuse me?
which one is this?
The Webster, Mass. Individual, Jonathan Sutkitis.
It's welcome to have Friday through Sunday in July.
Yeah, I know, that's what it was.
Yeah, so.
So he'll need
But he
to-
is asking for Pioneer Park, so I think if, he wants to amend, is he still interested in
Oh,
for July and not at all?
no, he wants September.
Now he wants
Like,
September,
This is
so.
like, this is.
Also, he's circled
Where's the application?
Holiday Classic Memorial Day weekend, but I'm assuming that this is for
Is it back?
the membership.
Okay. So we will, is there a motion to approve Jonathan, appending? Jonathan from Webster, Mass, I didn't say all this.
Do we have to first establish a special event for September?
Because we haven't yet,
7th and
really,
8th, correct?
7th and 8th,
I
yeah.
mean, is that what we wanna do? A special event for September 7th
so-
and 8th that includes vending on the sidewalks,
I second that
as well
motion.
as in Pioneer Park and music on the lawn at 22.
Okay, we've already established vending, and so for the merchants, but I mean, we could do it again. We've already done it for our merchants for the whole,
I know, but then what do we do with like, this Peebles Huntington thing? I mean, I feel like.
That's in front of us.
This is
I
somebody
thought
who's
that was
outside who
better.
wants to come in and do this.
Yep.
I'm opposed to this.
It's a partnership with a local business.
no, he's
No,
talking
He's
about
talking
that.
about Webster Good.
Oh, I thought you just said Peebles there, Richard. Which one are you talking about?
Let's talk about Jonathan.
Scientist.
I mean, but if we open up Pioneer Park, so for instance, the Rotary can bend, then we can't be exclusionary.
The what? Can you say that again, Cindy?
We can't exclude somebody if there's space.
Let's put it on hold. I'm not sure the Rotary's gonna be asking for it this year.
I don't think they are either, but at this point, we have 2 applications, correct? No, we only have 1 that would need to utilize Pioneer
And
Park.
I think
I
that
don't want
application.
That's the only place we really
Right.
have
Yeah.
room for outside businesses, because really each merchant controls the way we devise that
Yeah,
law.
It's also a lovely place to be able to sit and enjoy all the things.
I'd like to leave Pioneer Park for the hot dog vendor and possibly non-for-profit local organizations.
You can't
Can't do that?
stipulate.
Once, you gotta have, let me just say it this way, our law is structured nicely that you, each business owner is given control over the property in front of their business. So our belief is, let me just say it that way, that they're gonna want to either use it themselves or have another local person anyway. So we really control most of Main Street through that utilization. But those areas that are open to the public sometimes double day parking lot, double day or Pioneer Park. If we allow vending in them, we can't distinguish between those and outsiders. It's
So far, this is the only person who's asked to vend in Pioneer Park.
correct.
Well, as I said, I would be against vending in Pioneer Park altogether.
I would too.
You'd be opposed to it.
I'm not opposed to it. I'll be in favor.
I'm not opposed to it, but I would rather keep the music in Pioneer Park than move it, because I think it helps with the liveliness of the downtown, and if you push it.
Well, you have a choice there then.
They will be boarding the trolleys and the buses on Fair right by the music, though, right?
If we allow vending, the fence will block anybody from getting into the
Yeah.
back of the park.
I think
So the
it's
back of the
really-
park is useless if we have vending.
Well, I also think that this person, the only one person needs to resubmit their application with the correct information, so we could potentially not decide this meeting.
We can talk about it at economic development on Wednesday and have a recommendation for the board on
Good.
later in the
Yeah,
month. if you
that would be
want
good.
Do that, yeah, do that.
to do.
But also,
have to
did we
put-
get a new application from this applicant, Joe?
You have to put Jonathan on one more time. Thanks, Dennis.
Sure.
Feels hard. All right, so did we move, let's see, we did. Well, Peoples is essentially granted, you know, if they're right in front of the building, they're granted, where are Prairies to?
And then here's where else.
Harry should have one, shouldn't he?
Yeah, he's right.
Yeah, you can find it.
Well, no, it says in front of Key Bank.
Yeah, or just-
Oh, he does own the Key Bank. Oh, got it, okay. Perfect.
Well, did we waive the fees on these? I just want to be clear with that.
He owns the building that he
The
banks, so
fees
let's be clear
For
about that.
business owners.
We did put all
Because
this.
Mr.
number.
Peoples,
We waived all fees.
he sent me $100 check, so I need to send it.
You can tell everyone who wants to make a generous donation to them.
Certainly.
The last trip back to the second.
So do we want to approve those two? Peoples and Ferrara?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second. All in favor?
Gordon, I just have one small
So
favor
that's
to ask.
Peoples and.
You remind Harry not to extend his permit like he's done every other time.
We have done that every year. We actually went to court 3 years ago and had a fine imposed. Paid it. And the maximum fine was
No, it finds nothing compared to what the value of the rental spaces for that day.
I hear
Just so I am clear on this. We just approved his food tables. In front of Keegan.
these food tables or?
The one
Additional
that's-
tables for Hardball Cafe Restaurant. In front of Keegan.
Yeah, I mean,
Did you
what else
realize
would
you
he
were
be?
doing that?
What else would
No,
he
I
be
was
selling?
looking at baseball cards.
I was looking.
He's got a turn on.
Well, there's two there.
What's on do with this?
Well, I mean, outdoor dining, you can't extend beyond the facade of your restaurant.
No, so one of these should not have been approved, is what I'm saying.
Yes, so
Yeah, I agree.
So the Hardball Cafe one.
improve the hardwall in front of the hardwall cafe, but not.
No, we do not approve Hardball Cafe, we approve it for the baseball cards.
He's already got dining on the sidewalk.
So-
He's got it in front, what he wants is to move it to the adjacent
Okay, we
building,
get it.
which we do not
You
allow.
can't- you can't.
So I need to amend my motion that I made. Is that what I need to do?
Yeah.
Yes,
So to amend it to allow for the sale of baseball cards
in front of
in
Keegan,
front of Key Bank and not to,
and just, yeah,
and not to approve the additional tables in front of Key Bank.
all right, so.
Wait,
we're gonna say-
124 Main is not keeping, it is the.
The old.
Says B.
It's the whole- yeah,
That's the one he's doing baseball cards. That must be the old,
I think he submitted a permit to sell to sell baseball cards at his own property.
But he's saying requested location of sale, front of Keating.
That's
what
for
the
the
first
food.
one's-
That's for the
second
ones you
one's
don't
124
want to
Main
do, so that's
Street.
additional tables. So his other one, I just asked Cindy, what's BTP?
It's TJ's.
It's TJ's?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what the new.
Does he?
Of course it is, because it's an even
Yes.
number.
You know what it is? It's the three guys. It's the three fellas who own that
Harry.
together.
Perry and B and T.
Yeah.
So he already has the ability to do.
Yeah, so he's already got
Yeah.
this.
Well, we can approve.
We don't have to, so we don't have to approve anything for him. He's already got the ability to put the food tables out. And we're not, no, in front of.
We're not approving that.
No, it's not in front of, we're not approving his extension of what he already has.
Correct.
Correct.
On that side, and he already has the right to put his baseball cards out in front of his store.
Because he owns it.
Pays to read these applications, well.
Unless he's thinking he's coming way out, but we only give him so many feet, right? Doesn't it say
I
something?
mean, yeah.
So what are you gonna do when he puts the tables out there anyway, Mark, which he will do?
And this year I have a really big tall guy. I'll probably walk up with me. But no, Perry's always been, I go and I tell him you can't do it, he'll move it back, he'll edge him out again.
And then as soon as you turn your back around, and come out again.
I would walk back up and down. I'm not really
He's
the
always
enforcement
gonna
officer.
push
Yeah,
the limits. I mean, 2 years ago, he was
I know.
selling chairs on Main Street. I mean, it is what it is, so we just have to be observant.
We've been pretty.
So should we approve the 24 May in case he wants to come out on the public property beyond his private property?
What about the People's Sky, what was that, so, and I'll just amend the motion for me,
Doesn't
like,
tell me
it was
what the
confirmed,
People's
because he's already allowed to do.
Correct.
We allow.
That would you like to do?
That's perfect, that's my motion.
All right.
Yeah.
Third time's the charm.
They do.
Second.
All right, so we're working through this over here, and Mac has, for the third time, proposed amending his motion to remove, the rescind his proposal to, approve Harry's two applications.
I think we should approve 124, in case he,
There you go.
in case he inches onto public property, then he's covered. Because we know he's gonna inch onto public property.
And you can be out on public property
Yeah.
with the permit, because you're allowed, I think it's 4 feet.
Okay, so what do you want? Because that business owns its own property in front of its store.
But what if-
Only under the overhead.
Under the
But
overhead.
what if he inches on the side?
But wouldn't that be covered under the
Under
summer
the
sidewalks?
Right.
Yeah, but we just need to approve it, because we haven't approved it yet. It would be covered under summer sidewalks.
Gotcha, but we haven't, okay.
So we did approve that. though.
Yeah, because I didn't
Did
think
they
we
have
had,
to
once you
submit
approve the
permits?
special use, we didn't, I don't have to keep bringing all those applications.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Did we already? do
Yeah,
that?
we did that.
Oh, sorry, I was like,
so Mac is right, he gets to rescind that.
Say it
other
twice
one.
more, Mac.
Yeah, one more time.
Okay, I make a motion to rescind any approvals for Perry Ferrara because.
No, don't word it that way.
I like it
Word
that way. It's good.
For Hartwell
Jenna will make
Cafe
it
and
We're being recorded
BTP,
anyway, so.
with the appropriate language to rescind those approvals for those applications and to approve Huntington Baseball, the People's application. Where is it?
Basically, we're turning down 2 other forms.
Yeah, Huntington Baseball Company.
Motion's been made, seconded by Jean, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, any nays? No.
I'm just confused, that's.
All right. We need to approve 2 applications to use, it's Ferry Spring Park for fireworks on July 24th and September 8th. So sponsored by the Hall of Fame.
Both of them are Hall of Fame.
Mhm.
What are they doing on July 24th?
That's the awards
Oh.
ceremony. That they're still, all right, so motion by Jean, okay.
Quick question, so when it says from 3:30 to midnight, I know they're kind of set up and stuff. We're not closing the park at 3:30, are we?
We haven't in the past, because they've been able to kind of set up on that road.
Okay.
They were very good with the fire department ones in terms of encouraging people to leave it a reasonable hour.
Okay.
But not at 10:30.
Okay.
So is there a motion
Yes.
by Jean, second by Matt, all in favor? And trolley, Cindy, we want to have some actions on trolley.
Yes, we have 3 different actions and they're all related to the Hall of Fame induction. We previously approved a trolley season that ended on September 5th. The streets committee suggests extending the trolley season to September 8th, so I will make that motion.
Second.
Moved by Cindy, seconded by Richard, all in favor?
Then our second action is to amend the fare schedule on September 8th. So that there will be 1 pass rate and it will be $5 per person collected in cash on the trolley.
Cindy's made that motion. And seconded her discussion, second by Jean, a discussion.
Are the credit card machines working now?
That's debatable.
And they would have to be reprogrammed for 1 day, and it'd be the last day now.
It wouldn't be worth it.
It wouldn't be worth it.
Of course, the problem is gonna be.
You know, I talked to
Those
Matt,
young people don't care.
I talked to Matt about this, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this. AP and it goes on, this is Cooperstown, and it goes on the Hall of Fame.
I think anyone coming to this
Bring
particular
cash.
event would bring cash.
Yeah, 2 years ago, when we did it cash only, nobody complained, nobody had an issue.
They generally pay cash for the parking around town
And
and
they take cash for their hot dogs.
Cash for Bitcoins.
Okay.
Yeah, whatever works.
Cryptocurrency accepted in Cooperstown.
Yep, so that's the motion.
And it's been, what, was seconded by Jean for discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
And
Cindy,
then, yes,
Should have visited this before your motion was passed. On the top, on A, on the trolley season,
yes,
ending the day of the induction.
yes.
Do you think it is relevant to maybe consider extending it through to the end of the week or to that following Sunday?
There was a
Do we-
general consensus that it will be hard enough to find drivers to work through Wednesday because they're school bus drivers. And
Got it,
picking
okay.
up Thursday and Friday would be very, very difficult.
Okay.
All right, and then the last one, 2 years ago, we signed a lease agreement with Leatherstocking Trolley to lease for $1 the private trolleys, $1 each, I believe, the private trolleys that are owned by Leatherstocking for the induction only, so that we could maximize the number of vehicles on the road. We do not know if this is gonna be necessary at this point. The Hall of Fame is still trying to predict the amount of crowd that will be here, but if it is as big as some think it will be, it may behoove us to have additional trolleys beyond the 3 that we own.
And he would be able to have drivers for them at, so they will be, if we agree to this, we're getting 1 or 2 trolleys from Leatherstocking Trolley?
I believe 2 additional.
2 for $1 a piece. And then Leatherstocking Trolley on those, the $5 cash that's paid as he goes in would go to him, or is it all part of the trolley money?
I believe it becomes part of the trolley money, is the way we've done it in the past.
You believe? Okay, can we confirm that too?
Absolutely.
Try and see here and empty school buses, with everybody walking there. So I believe the city of Oneonta is gonna be closed September 8th. Schools.
Well, it's our trolley provider could not contract with the city of Oneonta for school buses. The Hall of Fame will be contracting with Bernie Bus to provide buses that go from.
I'm just saying, there's a place to look for drivers,
Oh, yeah,
as a suggestion.
yeah, you're not talking about vehicles.
No, I'm talking about drivers.
Yeah.
So I do believe they have that day off.
I believe Wednesday it will be possible to find. It'll be interesting. Yeah, we can, that one we can return to at our next meeting. It was more getting out on our own online.
Well, I would, why don't we just do it now, so it doesn't slip through the cracks, but should, with the understanding that the funds are part of the trolley system. So that would be the motion, and then if it turns out not to be the case in any way, then it's not valid.
Absolutely. So I will make a motion that we lease private vehicles for September 8th at a rate of $1 per vehicle, with the understanding that the funds paid that day become part of the trolley system account.
Motion made by Cindy, second by Jean, all in favor? Is there anything else? John? I think that it was, a lot of work and a lot of thought that everybody put into the special use permits. Thank you. I guess I adjourn.
We gave a